Hi guys. Today, we are going to learn an introduction of British kings and queens, who have ruled in the British Isles since the days of the Romans. We will learn about Roman Britain, early English kings, Picts and Scots, early Welsh kings, and early Irish kings. So let's start. British kings and queens introduction. Roman Britain. The British Islands first became known to the Romans through Julius Caesar's two expeditions in 55 BC and 54 BC. The main island was generally known by them as Britannia, but it was not until the time of Claudius, nearly 100 years later, that the Romans made a serious attempt to convert Britain into a Roman province. There is evidence to suggest that there were tribal rulers in Britain as early as 4,500 years ago, but the contemporary records of the Romans give the first clear proof that there were Iron Age tribal kings and queens. The tribes were migrants from mainland Europe who spoke Celtic tongues akin to Gaelic, Irish and Welsh and used coins similar to those used in Greece and Rome. Among these tribes were the Atrebates, based around Sussex, Brigantes, who founded York as their capital, Catuvellauni, based around Hertfordshire, Rhyni, based in Sussex, and the Iceni, based around Norfolk and Suffolk. After the Roman conquests, some of the leaders of these tribes were made client rulers under Rome and retained their power. Others, such as Boudicca of the Iceni tribe, rebelled and were crushed. The heart of Roman rule was in the southeast of England, but Roman armies also came into contact with the tribes of the north. The battle at Mons Graupius, thought to have been in Aberdeenshire, gave the Romans a temporary foothold, but the rugged terrain, as much as the resistance of the tribes, meant they had to retire behind the wall built in AD 120 by Hadrian, between the Solway and the Tyne. Thus the southern part of the island alone remained Roman and became specially known as Britannia, while the northern portion was distinctively called Caledonia. 8 Roman emperors were proclaimed in Britannia, and it became an important part of the empire, but by 400 attacks from northern Europe, Scotland and Ireland had almost exhausted the resources of the province. Hadrian's wall was abandoned and troops withdrawn from important outposts until, around 415, the formal rule of the Romans ended. Early English kings. After the Romans withdrew, Romano-British rulers had to defend their territories against attack from fierce northern tribesmen. They also had to contend with invasions by Germanic tribes eager to drive them out and settle new lands. From what are now called the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark and France came the Angles, Saxons and Jutes to set up hundreds of petty states. The rulers of these states claimed the war god Woden as their ancestor and, with the consent of a council of advisors known as the Witan or White Najmot, bequeathed their crowns to their sons. In time the larger of these states swallowed the smaller until, around 700, there were about 40 established statelites. Eventually a group of the 7 most prominent states emerged, generally referred to as Heptarchy, which dominated most of the southern part of Britain. This consisted of the kingdoms of Kent, the South Saxons, in Surrey and Sussex, the East Angles, East Anglia, the East Saxons, Essex and Middlesex, the West Saxons or Wessex, Devon, Dorset, Somerset and part of Cornwall, Northumbria, Northumberland, York and Durham, and also southeast Scotland, and the Kingdom of Mercia, which included Gloucester, Leicester and Chester. To the north were the Picts and Scots, to the west were the Celts of Wales. The Britons fleeing the European invaders had settled in Strathclyde, the southwest of Scotland, and Cornwall. The battle for supremacy between these 7 kingdoms persisted until at length Wessex overran Mercia, Sussex and all the lands south of the Humber, and the whole came to be known as England, or Angleland. These were uncertain times, however, and the Angle kings were frequently defeated by the ambitions of Danish invaders. Their advance was checked for a time by Alfred the Great, who also ensured that those he defeated were converted to Christianity, and many were diverted to northern France where their settlements became Normandy. Alfred was the first to bring about some form of national unity among the Anglo-Saxons, but his descendants could not claim to rule all England, and fought against the Danes, with varying degrees of success, to maintain power. By 1016 England had again been made to submit to foreign rule as the Danish king, Canute, made England part of a greater northern European empire. When this empire finally collapsed, England was left disunited, a state of affairs that was finally exploited by a Norman, Duke William of Normandy, who began his conquest by defeating the English forces at Hastings in 1066. Picts and Scots. The inhabitants of the northern lands, known to the Romans as Caledonians and to the Britons as the people of Albion, could be distinguished as Goidels, or Gaels, and Picts. The Gaels were of a similar stock to the British, and, since the 18th century, British and Gaels have alike been termed Celtic. This usage originated in the discovery of an affinity between the language of Brittany and those of the Welsh and of the Scottish Highlanders. It is, however, important to make a distinction between the Brittonic Celts of Wales, Cumbria and Strathclyde, and the Goidelic Celts or Gaels of the Northern Highlands. By the 6th century these northern tribes were more commonly known as Picts, which means literally painted people. As well as the Picts, a body of Celts from Ireland, known as Scots, had, by the middle of the 6th century, settled in what is the present-day county of Argyll and founded the Kingdom of Dalriada. This kingdom consisted of Argyll, part of Northern Ireland and the islands of the Inner Hebrides. The amalgamation of the Scots, Picts, Britons and Angles into one kingdom was a slow and lengthy process. The foundation for the ultimate union of the Scots and the Picts was laid by Saint Columba, who travelled to the already Christianized kingdom or Dalriada in 563. The actual occasion of the union of Scots and Picts, however, was to come via a combination of factors. Dynastic intermarriage, religious unity and Scandinavian aggression all played their part. But it was the strong leadership of Kenneth MacAlpin, King of Scots, which finally brought the kingdoms together. Under his guidance the Scots became the dominant force in the land, and the idea of the Picts as an independent people largely died out. The amalgamation of the Lothians and of Strathclyde with Alba, the kingdom of Picts and Scots, was delayed for 2 centuries. Strathclyde was finally merged through dynastic inheritance, but it took the collapse of Northumbrian power and the consolidation of England under the successors of Alfred the Great to unite the Scots and Angles. Successive monarchs of Alba tried to add Lothian to their dominions, but it was not until 1018 that it was finally annexed and the whole of the historical kingdom of Scotland was ruled by one king, who maintained the title of King of Scots. Early Welsh kings. Previous to the Roman occupation, Wales appears to have been chiefly inhabited by 3 British tribes, called the Silures, Dimeti, and Ordovices. During the latter period of the Roman occupation the subjected part of the island was divided into 4 provinces, of which one, including the country from the Dee to the Severn, was called Britannia Secunda. It was after the invasion of the Saxons that the country acquired a distinctive national character as the refuge of the vanquished Britons who were gradually driven to the west. From this period until the final conquest of the country by Edward I, there is little but a succession of petty wars between the rival chiefs or kings into which both countries were divided during a great part of the Saxon period, or the more systematic efforts of the larger monarchy to absorb the smaller. By war and marriage 3 main territories were established, Wynedd in North Wales, Powys in the central region, and Deheubarth in South Wales. Of the 3, Wynedd spread its influence the farthest, and sometimes dominated all Wales. By 1200s, however, Welsh kings had been reduced to lords and princes owing homage to the King of England. The last of the Welsh princes, Llyn, who revolted against Edward I, was defeated by the Earl of Mortimer in 1284. Since that time the principality has been incorporated with England, and Wales has given the title of Prince of Wales to the heir apparent of the British Crown. Early Irish kings. As in Western Europe generally, the earliest inhabitants of Ireland are believed to have been of Iberian race and therefore akin to the modern Basques. They were followed by the Celts, different tribes who probably arrived at different times. Among these the Scots were the latest, and subsequently got the upper hand, so that their name became generally applied to all the inhabitants. The land was divided into 5 principal kingdoms: Ulster, Munster, Leinster, Connaught and Meath, which were each divided in turn into lesser divisions or chiefdoms. Each king or chieftain desired to become the Ardrí High King of the whole island, but for centuries no one achieved any real degree of supremacy. Following the introduction of Christianity and Christian literature by St. Patrick, Ireland became an important seat of learning. Its internal condition, however, was far from satisfactory. Divided among a number of hostile kings or chiefs, it had been long torn by internal wars and for nearly 2 centuries ravaged by the Danes, numbers of whom settled in the country, when, in the beginning of the 11th century, Brian Boru united the greater part of the island under his scepter and subdued the northern invaders. After the death of Brian, the island relapsed into its former state of division and anarchy. In this state of matters, Henry II of England obtained a papal bull giving him the right to subdue it. In 1172 Henry entered Ireland himself, and partly through the favour of the clergy, the great princes did homage to him and acknowledged his supremacy. Many Norman barons and their followers now settled in the country, but the English power was far from being established over it. For long, only a part was recognized as English territory, generally known as the Pale, and this was governed by various nobles subject to a viceroy. The greater part of the island remained unconquered, and English supremacy was threatened frequently by rebellions of Irish chiefs and barons. It was not until the reign of Henry VIII that the title of King, instead of Lord, of Ireland was properly established. The chieftains of Ulster remained fiercely independent, however, and continued to seek allies on the continent to rid Ireland of the English. During the reign of Elizabeth I they were eventually forced to flee, and this flight of the earls became a turning point in the history of England's involvement in Ireland, for it was then that the settlement of English and Scottish Protestants in Ulster began. Ireland remained under English, and then British, kings and queens until the time of Edward VIII's abdication in 1936. Independence was finally achieved in that year when the Irish Free State abolished the monarchy and formally became a republic. British monarchs continued to reign over Northern Ireland, comprising most of what had been the ancient kingdom of Ulster, and that's it for today. What are your thoughts about the introduction of British kings and queens? Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and click the notification bell. If you want to learn facts about something or someone, just watch on info.